Hello. Let me ask you something. How do you turn the happiest moment of your life into an absolute train wreck? Simple. Find out your wife is pregnant when you've been religiously using protection for 3 years. I always thought if I got cheated on, I'd go nuclear, flip tables, burn clothes, and go full soap opera. Turns out, I'm way more creative when I'm pissed off. So, let's start from the beginning. I'm Jake, 34, living what I thought was the American dream. Stable career, mortgage half paid off, 2 golden retrievers named Moose and Whiskey, and a wife, Emily, who I believed was my best friend. We had been married for 5 years, together for 8. Life was comfortable, predictable, even, and I liked it that way. Emily worked in marketing, which meant she spent half her time at networking events that involved overpriced cocktails and schmoozing with middle-aged execs who laughed too hard at their own jokes. I never thought much of it. She had her career, I had mine, and trust was something I never had a reason to doubt. Then came the pregnancy announcement. She dropped the news over breakfast like she was telling me we were out of milk. No build-up, no excitement, just a casual, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. My brain short-circuited. I blinked at her like she had just told me she was joining a cult. See, here's the thing. Emily and I always used protection. Every single time. She wasn't on birth control because she didn't like how it made her feel, and that was fine. But I was always careful. We had agreed to wait a few more years before thinking about kids, and I sure as hell didn't forget that agreement. I played my part, though. I smiled, acted surprised, kissed her, and told her how excited I was. But deep down, my gut was screaming. Something was off. At first, I thought I was overreacting. Maybe it was some freak accident, a statistical anomaly. Condoms aren't 100%, right? But the more I sat with it, the more that little voice in my head told me to wake the hell up. And then, like divine intervention, I stumbled upon something that confirmed every suspicion. Emily's phone was on the counter while she was in the shower, buzzing with a notification. Normally, I wouldn't even glance. But something about the name on the screen made my blood run cold. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? I didn't recognize the number, but I sure as hell recognized the reality check I just got. So, I did what any rational, level-headed man would do. I smiled, kissed my wife on the forehead, and told her we needed to throw a paternity test reveal party to celebrate our growing family. Oh, you better believe this is going to be good. The second the idea popped into my head, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure she never forgot this moment for the rest of her life. The first step was laying the groundwork. I started playing the role of the doting, clueless husband to perfection. Every time Emily mentioned the baby, I acted ecstatic, as if I had no doubts in the world. I even started looking up nursery designs and baby names, just to sell the fantasy. She bought it hook, line, and sinker. But behind the scenes, I was working on my masterpiece. I found a lab that specialized in discrete paternity testing. All I needed was a sample, which wouldn't be hard to get once the baby was born. But I didn't want to wait that long. I needed something sooner. So, I did some digging and found out that some high-end clinics offered prenatal paternity testing using a simple blood sample from the mother. It was expensive as hell, but I wasn't about to spare any expense for this grand finale. Now, I needed a way to bring this into the party without raising suspicion. That's when it hit me, gender reveal parties. People were doing these elaborate, over-the-top celebrations all the time. Why not have one for the paternity test? I could frame it as a fun, modern way to surprise our family with even more good news. The guest list was easy. Her parents, my parents, close friends, and a few of her colleagues from work. Oh, and I made sure to invite someone special, her secret lover. The real fun was about to begin. The weeks leading up to the party were agonizingly slow, but I used that time wisely. I perfected my performance, playing the adoring husband to the point where even I almost believed it. I planned small romantic gestures, flowers delivered to her office, spontaneous dinner dates, and the occasional long, heartfelt speech about how lucky I was to start a family with her. Every time I saw the guilt flicker across her face, I knew I was on the right track. I needed her to feel safe, secure, like she had pulled off the deception flawlessly. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on her, carefully monitoring every move. She thought she was being discreet, but I had installed a tracking app on her phone months ago. The late-night, work meetings, and impromptu weekend errands suddenly made a lot more sense. She wasn't just seeing one guy, there were at least two. The irony was almost poetic. Here she was, glowing with pregnancy, believing she had me fooled, while I sat back watching her own downfall play out in real time. The final preparations for the party came together smoothly. I had a custom cake made, one with a center filled with either blue or pink frosting, because why not? The real surprise, though, was hidden in an innocuous little envelope that would be presented right before the cake cutting. The paternity results. The piece of paper that would change everything. The morning of the party, I kissed Emily on the forehead as she slept and whispered that I loved her. Then I stepped outside, looked up at the sky, and smiled. Tonight was going to be one for the history books. As the guests arrived, I played the gracious host, making sure everyone had a drink in hand and plenty of snacks to keep them occupied. Emily glowed under the attention, oblivious to the noose tightening around her. I made sure to keep a close eye on one particular guest, the man I suspected to be the father. He was there, all right. Smug, clueless, completely unaware that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. Finally, the moment arrived. I tapped my glass and called for everyone's attention. The cake was brought out, the excitement in the room palpable. Emily beamed at me, shining with what she thought was happiness. I handed her the envelope. Before we cut the cake, I said, I thought we'd reveal something even more special. A surprise for all of us. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to confusion as she opened it. Then, as her eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The room fell silent. I let the moment stretch before I finally spoke. Surprise. The room was thick with anticipation. Everyone had a drink in hand, and the air was buzzing with excitement. Emily, still wearing that blissfully ignorant smile, stood at the center, her parents beaming proudly by her side. My parents, on the other hand, were a bit more reserved. My mother had been giving me odd glances all evening, probably sensing that something wasn't quite right. I took a deep breath and tapped my champagne glass with a fork. Ding, ding, ding. Everyone, first of all, I just want to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate such a special occasion, I started, my voice steady and warm. This is a moment I never thought I'd experience, and I wanted to make sure it was truly unforgettable for everyone involved. Emily reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The irony of the gesture nearly made me laugh. I squeezed back, just for the theatrics. Now, before we cut the cake, I have a little surprise for my beautiful wife-to-be, I said. Something that will really make this night one for the history books. The guests murmured in excitement. Emily looked delighted, tilting her head in curiosity. I turned to my best man, Alex, who was standing near the entertainment system. I gave him the nod. He smirked, lifted the remote, and pressed play on the projector I had discreetly set up earlier. The screen behind me flickered to life. At first, it showed a montage of our happy memories, photos of Emily and me on vacations, at family gatherings, all the moments I had once cherished. But then, the footage shifted. A security camera feed. A hotel room door opening. Emily, stepping inside, followed by a man who was most definitely not me. The moment was glorious. Gasps filled the room. Emily's smile froze, then cracked, then shattered completely. She blinked, staring in horror as the video continued. Her lover, one of her colleagues, wrapped his arms around her, kissing her like they weren't in a world where consequences existed. Her mother gasped. Her father turned red. My dad let out a long, low whistle like he was watching a football game. The room was dead silent, except for the faint sound of the video playing. I let it run for a few excruciatingly long seconds, just enough for everyone to fully absorb what they were seeing. Then, I cleared my throat and turned back to the audience. Ah, my mistake, I said, feigning embarrassment. That wasn't the gender reveal. But since we're already here, I suppose I should show you all this as well. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. The paternity test results. Emily looked like she was going to pass out. With a flourish, I tore it open and read it aloud. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room exploded. Emily's mother burst into tears. Her father stood there, stunned, his face as red as a tomato. My best friend hooped in the back like he had just watched a home run. Someone dropped their drink. Emily? She just stood there, frozen, like a glitching NPC in a video game. I turned to her, smiling. So, sweetheart, any thoughts on this? Or would you prefer if I let your boyfriend explain? Silence. Then, her lover, Mr. Networking Event, made the biggest mistake of his life. He tried to run. I'm not even kidding. The moment the crowd turned to stare at him, he bolted toward the door. But remember my best man, Alex? Former college linebacker? Yeah, he was ready. In 2 seconds flat, Alex intercepted him, grabbing him by the collar before he could escape. The guy let out a noise that can only be described as pure regret. Leaving so soon? Alex asked, grinning. At this point, Emily finally seemed to snap out of her trance. Jake, please, I can explain, she stammered, reaching for me. I took a step back, holding up a hand. Oh, trust me, Emily. You already have. The party? Ruined. My revenge? Perfect. And the best part? Every single person in that room left knowing the real story. No misunderstandings. No, he said, she said. Just cold, hard proof that Emily had played herself right into my hands. I walked out that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Oh, and before I left, I took the cake with me. I figured I deserved something sweet after all of that. If you thought the video and paternity test were the grand finale, oh no. That was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin, and let me tell you, this wasn't just a simple confrontation. This was an all-out disaster, the kind that would be whispered about for years in family circles and group chats. Emily stood there, pale as a ghost, blinking rapidly like she was trying to reboot her brain. Meanwhile, the room had turned into absolute chaos. Her mother was sobbing into her hands, her father looked like he was debating whether to scream or collapse, and my best man Alex was still gripping the other guy by the collar, keeping him from making another escape attempt. And then, she lost it. Jake, how could you do this to me? Emily finally shrieked, her voice cracking. I tilted my head. Oh, you mean how could you cheat on me, get pregnant, lie about it, and let me believe this was the happiest moment of my life? That part? She looked around, realizing every single person was watching, her parents, my parents, our friends, her colleagues. The walls were closing in. She snapped. You humiliated me, she screamed, stomping her foot like a toddler denied a candy bar. In front of everyone. And yet, somehow, I'm still not the one who brought another man's child into our marriage, I said, tapping my chin. Strange, isn't it? Her father, who had been uncharacteristically silent up to this point, suddenly erupted. Emily, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. Is this true? Emily flinched. She had never seen her dad truly lose his temper before. None of us had. Dad, it's not what it looks like, she said weakly. Oh, I said, crossing my arms. Because what it looks like is that you cheated, lied, and now you're mad that you got caught. But hey, maybe I missed something. Please, explain it to us, Emily. Her mother was shaking her head, whispering, no, 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 like she could somehow undo reality. And then, her secret lover, the man she had risked it all for, decided to speak. Emily, I told you this would happen, he muttered under his breath. You should have just been honest. Oh, that was not the right thing to say. Emily whipped around to face him, her eyes burning with a mix of rage and desperation. You are not helping right now, she hissed. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Her father took a step toward him. Who are you? He demanded, voice dangerously low. The guy swallowed hard. He's her coworker, I cut in helpfully. You know, from all those late-night work meetings she always had? Emily whirled back toward me. Jake, you don't understand, she cried, her voice now shaking. I didn't plan for this to happen, right? I said, nodding slowly. It just happened to happen. Multiple times. In a hotel room. While I was home waiting for you. Did I miss anything? The room went dead silent again. Then, her mother's voice, barely above a whisper. You told me you loved him, Emily. Emily froze. Her mother turned to look at me, tears in her eyes. Jake, I thought she was happy with you. I had no idea. And just like that, the last piece of Emily's support crumbled. Her mother walked away from her. Her father shook his head in disgust. And then, my parents? They stood next to me. It was over. Emily must have realized it, because suddenly, the fight drained out of her. Her shoulders slumped, and her face crumpled like a house of cards collapsing. And yet, she still had the nerve to try one last trick. She stepped closer to me, her voice softer now. Jake, please, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We've been together for years. That has to mean something. I stared at her. And then, I smiled. Oh, don't worry, Emily. It does mean something, I said, stepping back. It means I know exactly what kind of person you are. Then, I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. The silence outside felt almost surreal. The house I had just left was still buzzing with chaos, raised voices, hurried whispers, the clinking of glasses as someone nervously sipped their drink to avoid eye contact with reality. I could picture Emily in there, standing in the middle of the wreckage, her perfectly curated life unraveling around her. It was almost poetic. Almost. I didn't get in my car right away. Instead, I walked down the street, feeling the crisp night air sting against my skin, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. The weight of the deception, the lies, the sheer audacity of it all, it was gone. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Free. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew exactly who it was. Emily, probably cycling through every phase of damage control, apologies, excuses, deflections, and, if those didn't work, maybe even some misplaced anger. She had always been good at twisting the narrative, making herself the victim. Not this time. I finally got in my car, turned the key, and let the soft hum of the engine fill the silence. But I didn't drive home. No, I had one more stop to make before the night was over. The hotel was quiet at this hour, the lobby nearly empty except for the night clerk who barely looked up as I walked in. I knew the room number by heart. After all, I had seen it in the security footage. Room 314, where my wife had built her house of lies, brick by brick. I wasn't here for revenge. Not the petty kind, anyway. I had already delivered my masterpiece back at the party. This was just clean-up duty. I reached the door, knocked twice, and waited. It took a moment, but soon enough, footsteps approached, hesitant and slow. Then the door cracked open, and there he was, Mr. Networking Event himself. The look on his face was worth the drive alone. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like he had just seen a ghost. He probably thought I was going to throw a punch, demand some kind of explanation. But I didn't need one. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice calm. "Just thought I'd drop something off." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. His gaze flicked to it, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "You might want to open this now," I suggested, handing it over. He took it reluctantly, peeling back the flap with shaky fingers. Inside were neatly printed copies of every single expense receipt tied to his little affair with Emily. Hotel stays, dinner bills, a rental car under his name, parked outside her office more times than coincidence could justify. And the best part? It was all sent to his company's HR department earlier that day. I watched the realization wash over his face. The panic. The sheer horror as he connected the dots. His career? Finished. His reputation? Gone. He had bet everything on Emily, and she had cashed out before the house of cards collapsed. "You're smart," I said, my voice even. "You'll figure out your next steps. But just in case, there's also a copy in your wife's inbox." Thought she deserved to know what kind of man she married. His mouth opened, but no words came out. What could he say? There was no defense, no excuse good enough. I didn't wait for a response. I patted him on the shoulder, turned on my heel, and walked away. The drive home was almost too quiet, like the world itself had paused, letting me process everything. My mind wasn't racing. I wasn't thinking about Emily, or the fallout, or the spectacular amount of damage that had just been unleashed. I was thinking about what came next. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel this satisfying. I always thought it would be bitter, full of regret. But instead, it felt like justice. And as I pulled into my driveway, stepping out into the cool night air, I smiled to myself. Emily had spent years building a fantasy, convincing herself she could have everything, the husband, the affair, the lies, all without consequence. But the truth? The truth always catches up. And tonight, it finally had. The dust had settled. The party was long over, and the aftermath was spilling out into real life like a slow-burning wildfire. I had expected fallout, but the sheer scale of it was almost comical. Emily was officially radioactive. Her parents had cut her off, embarrassed and furious that she had dragged their family name through the mud. Her father, a well-respected businessman, couldn't believe his daughter had turned into the kind of person who would publicly humiliate herself in front of her entire social circle. Her mother? She had been holding on to the dream that Emily and I were the perfect couple, but that illusion had shattered that night. Her workplace wasn't any better. The whole thing had gone viral, not online, thankfully, but within the company. Office gossip spreads faster than wildfire, and when someone at the party let it slip what had happened, every single one of her colleagues found out. And guess what? Her secret lover? Fired. Turns out, the company had a strict policy about relationships between employees, especially when it involved sneaking off during office hours and using company money for hotel stays. Not only was he canned immediately, but his wife kicked him out, too. I had no idea where he ended up, but judging by the panicked texts Emily started sending me a few days later, she wasn't exactly thrilled to be dealing with him anymore. And Emily herself? Her reputation was ruined. She tried to play the victim, at first, telling people I had blindsided her, that I had overreacted and humiliated her in the worst way possible. But the problem was, she had no control over the narrative anymore. You can't gaslight an entire party of witnesses. Everyone saw the footage. Everyone heard the test results. Everyone watched as she tried to claw her way out of it. No one was buying her excuses. Her friends, at least the ones that weren't also lying, cheating scumbags, dropped her like a bad habit. No one wanted to be associated with someone who could get caught so publicly and still try to paint herself as the victim. Even our mutual friends took my side. Not because I asked them to, not because I begged for loyalty, but because, at the end of the day, people respect honesty. And what Emily did, it wasn't just cheating. It was calculated, planned, cold-blooded. I had given her years of my life, built a future with her, and she had thrown it away for cheap thrills and a guy who couldn't even hold on to his job. And that's when I realized something beautiful. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't even thinking about revenge. Because Emily had already lost. She lost her family. She lost her career. She lost her friends. And, most importantly, she lost me, the one person who actually cared enough to build a future with her, the one person who might have forgiven her if she had been honest before I found out. I blocked her number that night, deleted every message, and put the past exactly where it belonged. Behind me. The best revenge isn't rage. It isn't shouting. It isn't even public humiliation. The best revenge is walking away while they burn in the mess they created. And as I stood on my porch, watching the sun rise over a brand new day, I realized something. I had never felt so alive. The real story wasn't about her. It was about me finally being free. Bye-bye.